Reading today from Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. And Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. We often look at this passage and consider the woman that encountered Jesus along the way, and we talk about her faith, and we talk about that interaction and the kindness and the compassion that Jesus showed her, and all of those are interesting and very appropriate considerations when we look at this story. But I want to look at the story with you today from a different perspective, perhaps, and that is that I think Jesus gives us here a lesson in giving. Not so much what he says, but in what he does. Now, this lesson relates to much more than our interest in giving financially. Certainly, when we look at the Bible and consider matters of stewardship, we know that financial means are one of the important things that we consider when we think about how it is that we can and do give. But Jesus knew that giving involved much more than money. Material things, think about this for a moment, or maybe even do an inventory in your own life. Material things are only a small portion of our true wealth. In this incident between Jesus and this woman who had a long ongoing illness, an illness that had cost her all of her material means, and yet there had been no progress made toward her healing. Jesus shows us that giving for him in this situation was not about money. It was about his time and his energy, his healing energy. Consider this with me for a few minutes. Jesus' time and energy. From Jesus, we see some principles about the giving of our lives, the giving of our time, the giving of our energy. What can we learn from Jesus here? Well, one is that giving cost. Giving always costs. Again, please hear the term giving with a much larger uh, context than just financial things. Certainly it includes that. But giving always costs us. Giving here cost Jesus. Quote from Winston Churchill, we make a living by what we can get, but we make a life by what we give. Someone else has said our giving is an action, which is the natural result of a quality. That quality is generosity. If you read the Gospels and look at Jesus' life, you would say definitely that Jesus lived out of his generosity. His whole giving of himself on the cross was a phenomenal, ultimate act of great generosity. But here we find Jesus giving out of his energy, out of his power. Verse 30, Jesus perceiving himself that, look at that phrase, that power had gone out from him. It is draining to give. It was draining for him to give this healing to this woman. Power, his healing power, went out of his body. Anybody that's ever spent the night beside a sick bed, either a parent, a child, a spouse, a family member, or even a good friend, you've stayed the night and you know how draining the healing process can be. Certainly in that context, spending a night, it's draining physically. But think about other times, listening to a friend or family member pour out their heart because of a painful situation in their life. You may not be with them more than 15, 30 minutes, and physically you're sitting, there's no great physical drain on you, but you feel exhausted when you leave that conversation because the emotional and even the spiritual energy that was required to stay connected with that person in a compassionate way, not dismissing their concerns and not just immediately jumping into giving advice, but just to lovingly caring for them and listening to their issues. And you realize you're exhausted. It has drained you in that experience. Jesus felt the energy, the healing energy, the spiritual energy go out from him. Yet, rather than saying to this woman, you're tiring me out, get away from me, Jesus blessed this woman, even though she had surreptitiously pulled this power from him, not actually forcing out the power of Jesus. She didn't have the power to do that. She could not make Jesus heal her. It appears to me here that Jesus obviously operated continuously in a giving mode. His body, his mind, his soul was geared to giving whatever was needed. And so the healing energy within him was set to flow at the slightest request. And this woman's mere touch, yes, that was done in faith, believing that that was all that would be required for her to be healed. This woman's touch released Jesus' healing power. So Jesus' giving cost him power, cost him strength, but it also cost him time. It required him to revise his schedule. That may have happened with you on occasion. Jesus was on his way to heal the daughter of Jairus. He had agreed to do this. Jairus was the ruler, he's called the ruler of the synagogue, perhaps an elected position. He may not have been a theologian, but he certainly carried a very important religious task in his community. And as an aside here, this lets us see something that sometimes overlooked, and where I think am, and maybe we're all guilty of it at times, of seeing all the Jewish religious leaders as being opposed to Jesus, as being opponents of Jesus. Obviously, Jairus wasn't. Jairus came to him in faith, believing that Jesus could heal him, indicating that he was not, at least certainly not at that moment, he was not opposed to Jesus and Jesus' ministry. He believed in Jesus' ability to heal. Perhaps he had not come to be a believer in Jesus at this point, but he certainly believed in the ability of Jesus. And so he came to Jesus asking not something for himself personally, but for healing for his daughter, which of course was something he wanted. Jairus wanted very much. But this interruption by this woman cost Jesus time, caused him to revise his schedule on his way to do something very important. Giving, we see from Jesus, giving forces us to make choices. The woman came to Jesus, touched his garment. He stopped. He took time, interacted with her, made sure that her healing was complete and that she was thoroughly blessed. He chose to do that. She was healed. The scripture says that she was healed, verse 29, immediately. As soon as she touched Jesus, the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So Jesus did not have to stop. He would have perceived that the power going out of him had done its work, so he could have continued on. But this woman needed something more than just a physical healing. She needed a blessing. And so what did he say to her after the conversation? He says, daughter, she may have been older than he was, but she was certainly his spiritual daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. It was important because she had been, in some ways, because of her illness, she had become an outcast in many aspects of her culture. And so Jesus' blessing restored her to wholeness. And so even though this interruption cost him time and caused him to revise his schedule, he chose to take the time necessary to complete the healing, to see that she was not just healed physically, but that emotionally and spiritually healing took place as well. So giving forces us to make choices. Everything, I was taught this, I quoted him several times. My eighth grade, one of my eighth grade teachers made us understand when we talked about spending money, that everything has two costs. Everything on which we spend time, talent, money has at least two costs. You have the cost of what you purchase. If we think of it in financial terms with dollars, you have the cost of what you purchase, and then you have the cost of what you cannot purchase because of what you've already purchased. Or if it's a matter of time, you commit your time to this activity, that means you cannot do another activity because of the time you've already spent. You buy a new coat, you may not have enough money to buy the groceries that you need. There's a choice involved because of the two cost or the multiple cost that every expenditure, whether it's money, time, or talent, that every expenditure has. So we have to choose what we're going to purchase with our time, with our talent, with our money. And in choosing, we are deciding what we're not going to do, what we're not going to purchase. So Jesus made the choice to interrupt his schedule and give attention to this woman. That choice cost him his scheduled arrival at Jairus' house. And as those who came along the way reported to him and reported to Jairus within Jesus' hearing, the daughter had already died. In the mind of the onlookers, the crowd that was thronging around them, that meant the delay with this woman had cost Jesus the opportunity to heal the child. So the woman was helped, the child was lost. At least that's what was in the mind of the people who were observing this, and possibly in Jairus' mind immediately. But Jesus teaches us here that what is given in service is never lost, but it can be used to create even more opportunities to demonstrate the power of God. Let's reimagine this scene. The woman with a long illness doesn't hear about Jesus coming, doesn't see Jesus, or is not able to get to Jesus. Jesus doesn't know she's in the crowd. There's never any interaction with Jesus and this woman. He arrives at Jairus' house, finds the child deathly ill, but still very much alive, and he heals her. Likely that story never gets reported. The people of that day don't hear about it. We don't read about it many years later. But because Jesus gave himself in service to this woman, that created an opportunity for even a more powerful demonstration of the power of God. As Jesus went into that home and healed that child, raised that child back up. What we see here is that Jesus accepted an interruption. His schedule, his power was interrupted. What you've probably discovered, I know I have, sometimes the interruptions are the most important part of our day, even our lives. Jesus was interrupted. He took the time to give, and that made a lifelong, life-changing impact on the woman healed. Obviously made an impact on the child that was raised and her family and her neighbors. Think about it as we conclude this time. Our giving can and often does change lives. Sometimes we know about it. Sometimes we don't. Maybe we'll hear about it on the other side. How have you given in the name of Christ today? How can you give tomorrow? Let's be watching for opportunities of service, even those that seem like interruptions. They might just be of God. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time, and by all means, give me your feedback, especially about this story. How have you been interrupted, and how have you seen the Spirit of God using those interruptions to impact your life, but also other people's lives as well?